See this line
Yeah.
here? That is a metal sculpture that my brother gave me years ago. It's actually a version of an ancient chimera. You can see its tail is actually a serpent. And if it were a proper shimmer, I would have another head and it would have a goat's head sticking out the back. But what I found it in a box. I've always loved it. And I put it out and I looked at that and thought, I've needed to have that out. That
Mm.
is that is a certain energy source that I was forgetting about.
Mm.
It is. My brother got it for me because it was part of the leopard, lion, and wolf thing from Dante. And the
Oh.
lion, of course, is anger. But once you confront your anger, it becomes strength. It becomes force. It becomes the life force.
Mm.
And I see this every day and think, yeah, this is a reminder that the life force is right here. It never went anywhere. I've got two thoughts about today, and I mean they're very simplistic, but there are really some things that are going on when I think about your body of thought as I know it and how you work with me. And the first
Mm.
one is a real, probably I hope deceptively simple question, which is, what are you trying to do when you work with people?
Mm.
What do you want for them as a result of working with you?
Wow, that's a deceptively simple question. You
It is
you
deceptive.
you you got it. Okay, what am I trying to do? Well, my first thought, and I'm going to go with it, is bring out the maieutic midwifing method that we understand Socrates used. And so I'm attempting to elicit, to educe, to induce um, wisdom from the other person. So I do that in just a couple ways by listening, and then sometimes by speaking. Sometimes I don't like the things that I say, and I'm trying to learn to tune into the voice of wisdom in me that says, no, really, you should say that. And no, really, you should be quiet now. um, yeah. So that they hear themselves, so that they realize, well, that they're on the right track, or that they might develop what I call a tool. Because ultimately I want people to become independent of me. They might come back to work with me, but I'm working with them to bring them to a state of independence, so that they can hear themselves, so that they can develop their own tools. But I have certain things that I've kind of cut and dried that are tools, little fixes. I was just telling someone who's applying for jobs and is feeling scared about it that when I do that, I always apply for one that I don't really want first because I'm practicing. There's like little tricks that I do.
You know, I'm loving this, of course. First of all, it seems valid to me because that's the experience I have when I work with you.
Mm.
I feel that you're helping me give birth to my wisdom. Um, and I'll go back to that Socratic reference again. Of course, you nail me with that. I get quite excited. And I remember the story that when someone went to Socrates once and said, the Oracle at Delphi says that you're the wisest man in Athens. And he said, well, perhaps the Oracle realizes that I'm more aware of my ignorance than other people in Athens. They said,
Mm.
well, you are a great philosopher. And he said, I'm not a philosopher at all. I'm a midwife. And he said, the things that I learned, the best things I ever learned, I learned from Datima, my midwife. He names her. He names her.
Mm-hmm.
And and
She's a
to
very interesting figure in Socrates. Yeah.
yes, and he seems to be saying that through philosophy you can give birth to yourself, and
Mm.
that's what you are. That's the process that you're engaged in, and as I'm going to become your coach for a minute, I'm going to assume that role, which I do,
Right.
and just say, in my experience, you are extraordinary when you are playing that role.
Mm.
You I feel safe in your wisdom when you're
Mm.
playing that role.
Wow.
I am encouraged to explore myself in ways that I might not, because I feel safe because of that.
You are
And
safe. That's right.
I feel safe partly because you assume that role so naturally.
So, to people listening to this, like, I think I want to add that what's interesting about my work that I find interesting is that it's not in the abstract. It's not intended to make you feel good. Feeling good is kind of is happens for a legit reason. And that is because you've heard yourself say something wise. You've touched the ground of your own wisdom, like you're saying. And what I love about my work is that it's always problem focused. Somebody needs a job. Somebody's going out on their own to become an entrepreneur. Somebody is unhappy with the way they use time. Somebody's focus is really awful and they want to get it better. They want to learn to follow their calling. So we've talked about calling a lot in our other podcasts. We've talked about a couple of the other things. But so you and I, when we coach each other, we always bring a problem or a situation. And so it's always in response to that. And our culture makes those two things separate. Like maybe you would be smart and wise, but no, life or God or the goddess or ourselves or the universe keep presenting us with these interesting challenges. And if we just take a breath and coach, we can pull out of them, which is pulling out of ourselves, this amazing wisdom.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm seeing once again the strong relationship between what neurologists are beginning to discover in labs and the knowledge that disciplines like Buddhism and Hinduism have known for thousands of years, and how similar they are. And when you're dealing with a pragmatic problem, you come into the present moment, and then you actually hear more accurately what's going on. So I don't hear my story. I hear something that's perhaps more genuine that's happening in the moment because we're dealing with something practical. And it's wonderful.
That is. I love the way you're saying that. I love that. It's not an accident. It goes together.
It does.
Yeah. It does. I hadn't thought of that. That's wonderful.
Well, I mean, I think part of you have grounded yourself in a lot of ancient wisdom. And I think, ancient wisdom is very practical. People talk about it all being all woo-woo and mysterious and all that kind of stuff. It's like, no, not really.
No, not really.
It's like the ancient wisdoms often call themselves mysteries, but that's also very practical. That's also very practical.
Because just like shit, mystery happens. It really does. Mystery happens. But a lot of it arises from situations, right? I mean, Jesus taught in parables for that reason. There's so many teaching stories in all the ancient traditions because you're right. You start with a situation and from it, you derive wisdom. And this is just natural. So Tony, so I'm going to interview you for a minute. The Greeks did this thing with intelligence, and they said there's techne, from which we get technology. We know that sort of knowing how to do something. There's Sophia, which is kind of up here, wisdom, which we translate as wisdom. And then there's phronesis, which I understood to translate as situated wisdom, the wisdom that applies to a delimited place, a delimited time, which is where I kind of live. I love phronesis, and that was what I focused on in grad school to some extent. Do you have anything to offer about the division there? I enjoy the Greeks, but I'm also skeptical of them because they were very dichotomizing between phronesis and Sophia, which Sophia always seems, and of course it's the goddess of wisdom. I love that it's a female name, but it's like, I'm a phronesis fan. I'm over here cheerleading for phronesis.
Well, sure. I don't know what to say about that. Only that I think we misunderstand the Greeks because we want to look at them as the founders of rational thinking, and they were much more than that. They were much, much, much more than that. They often talked about ancient wisdom in two ways. They were talking about Crete, and they were talking about Egypt. And I'm fascinated by Roberto Colosso saying that when he was studying the ancient Egyptians, he noticed that they chuckled whenever they talked about the Greeks. The ancient Egyptian wise people were always going, well, the Greeks are well-meaning, but they're awfully naive. They really don't know how to get deep.
That's great.
And
the Greeks acknowledged a debt to the Egyptians.
Oh, they most certainly did. Plato's very wealthy parents sent him to Egypt to study. They said, you want to know something, you need to go talk to these people. And and of course, in the ancient world, they weren't saying, well, philosophy is something for people who can't think of anything else to do. It was philosophy as a way of solving vital problems that we must resolve if we want to survive. It was a matter of survival.
That's so interesting. So this thing we call philosophy, love of wisdom, is just as much a love of phronesis. It's just as much a love of...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It absolutely is. I mean, and it's interesting that Plato said if you wanted to study at his academy, the first thing you needed to do was understand math. I mean, you need to get really, really right down to it. Now, he was partly Pythagorean in his understanding. So to Pythagoras, math was the great mystery. It was a big mystical thing.
So thinking on different levels. There's always the metaphorical level or the energetic level. And then there's like you were saying about the lion behind you. There's a number of, we invest things with power. And those things also create us, like your lion. I'm reading a wonderful book now on on fetishes. And fetishes were dismissed by Freud and Marx, and in a very racist way, an overtly racist way. Africans use fetishes, we don't, we're better. And this guy is saying, he's an Afro-Atlantic religion practitioner and a major scholar at Duke, J. Loren Matori, and he's talking about that humans make gods and gods also make humans. That an atheist might say, oh, well, that's just projection. But the fact is, then there's some cool thing that happens where the God makes us also. The created thing also makes us.
Well, yes, and it reminds me, there was a statement that was made by, I'm forgetting his name. He was a traditional scholar when I was in graduate school that still outrages me to this day. And he said, traditional cultures can cry out in pain, but they cannot solve problems. And I thought, wow, if there ever was a sign of why modern social science kept getting itself in trouble, it was that. I mean,
and how ignorant, how
utterly ignorant.
Yeah, it's very.
How did we get here if those cultures weren't?
Yeah, I mean, social science has probably never solved a problem to my satisfaction, but traditional cultures have all the time. I mean, I often think, how would I handle this if I peeled away my layers and thought more like my ancestors or someone else's ancestors? Yeah, that's really interesting.
Isn't it? Isn't it? And this all I remember was this guy was in the political science department at Yale, which at that time was considered the great political science department in the country. And I thought, this is why we're in so much trouble, is because people like this are assumed to be the experts.
Yeah.
It's just arrogance.
It's rampant insecurity. That's hilarious. It's really funny.
Yeah.
Wow, yeah. Tony. Well, I think I like that we keep these to 15 minutes. So
let's do it.
I think I'm done. Yeah.